right, everybody. Welcome to podcast number 50, TWC podcast number 50. Today, tonight, this morning, I have as my guest Jacqui Zakar, and she's in Australia. And most of you, I'm sure, have been exposed to her in some one or another way recently. I've been talking to her also on and off. Just very interesting to talk to you, Jacqui, and welcome to the podcast. I don't know how much introduction I can give. I know, like, I'm very genuinely interested in your background and you know, because it seems like you're quite versatile type of person, and you've been a bunch of places. I mean, you're in Perth right now, but you lived in UK, and I think you're born in New Zealand or so, what?
Yep,
And then you have your dog sense training and behavior business, and but go ahead and fill in the the blanks for us.
sure. No problem. Oh, well, thank you so much for having me on. I've been really looking forward to it. But I guess I'm not the kind of normal dog trainer person that you would speak to, because I got started quite late in dog training. And when I first got started, which was pretty much 2015, I kind of started training more seriously and started learning from a few trainers, and then started my business the following year. But you know, I've got a very special interest in all the industry stuff and the wars and the research and, you know, how people interpret it. And I even though I started quite late and I was very aware that I was a little bit behind the curve, so to speak, I now look back, like you often do, and I feel like it's been a bit of a gift, because I think the industries I've worked in previously have really contributed to my interest in what goes on in the dog training world. So yeah, I was raised in New Zealand, so I'm a Kiwi, and moved to Melbourne in the early 90s, and then moved to Perth about a couple of years later. And then around the 2000, I lived in London for about 4 years, because my parents are English. So European passport's always helpful if you want to stay in London a bit longer than your visa would let you. And I took my border collie with me to London, so she came on the tube with me, and which was really, really cool. But in terms of my background, I have a degree in psychology. So when I graduated with that degree, I worked in mental health for a while, and I worked with like seriously mentally ill people. Like most of my clients or residents had a schizophrenic diagnosis or a comorbidity. Pretty much all of them heard voices, and I worked in like a residential setting with them for people that had come out of hospital and were trying to get to a point where they could kind of go out into the community again. And what I think I got from that was, part of my job was advocating for these residents. Like, I would go to their psychiatrist appointments with them. I'd drive them there, because a lot of them weren't really at a place where they could do that. And working in that and kind of seeing their experience really showed me how broken the system can be. Like, a lot of the psychiatrist appointments I would go to, the doctor wouldn't even make eye contact with them. It'd be pretty much like, oh, how you going? Yep. Okay, here's your script. Off you go.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And I was like, which I found quite shocking, because you assume that the system knows what they're doing and they're really trying to take care of people. But I realised that the system in mental health in Australia, and I think it's probably quite similar in the UK and the US, it's really a management system. It's not so much a recovery system. And the non-for-profit organisation I worked for worked from a recovery model. So sometimes that was quite challenging, that we would be pointing things out to the people that kind of had a lot of control over our residents, and we couldn't get them kind of the advocacy that they needed. And a lot of the times it felt like they don't really even want them out in the community. They want them to be managed. They just want them to fill their script, and it becomes a really revolving door of in and out of hospital because there's no recovery. So that kind of made me a little jaded about the system, and that's actually the main reason that I left that work, because it was just so frustrating. But it was very interesting. I probably learned more working in that job than I did in 4 years of a psych degree. Like, I learned so much about it. It was fantastic. And after that,
yeah, there is nothing like hands-on, right? I mean,
oh yeah, 100%, 100%. And even the residents hearing voices, and some of the residents that I had, literally their voices would tell them to kill staff. Like, and some of those guys, they didn't even bother me that much. Like, you really got used to that kind of thing because it was their experience, and you really learn to accept that it's not about oh, they're not real, just ignore them, you'll be okay. It was like, look, that's your experience, that's your reality. Like, how do we know that that isn't a real experience? So if I had a counseling session with one of them and they were struggling that day, I would say to them, like, are your voices bothering you? How about, you come back tomorrow morning, like, go and rest up and take some time. So that side of it was really eye-opening, that you've really got to look at the different experiences and think outside of the box, that it's not always how the system dictates and how you should approach these things. But when I got out of that job, I went into pharmaceuticals, and I worked in pharmaceuticals for 8, 9, nearly 10 years, I think it was.
oh, wow.
Yeah, so I was a product specialist or a pharmaceutical rep, but I would educate doctors and surgeons,
Because guess what we're
pharmacists.
gonna talk about at some point?
Okay. I don't know what that was.
Fluoxetine.
But and what I kind of got from that was, and look, I know the pharmaceutical industry is controversial, so like that's
Yeah.
kind of another topic. But as a rep in Australia, we have to do a certification in Medicines Australia. So you have to do a year's study learning the process, how the research works, our responsibilities, all of that kind of stuff. So here, if I'm in front of a doctor and I'm presenting them with a new study about the medicine that I'm educating them on, we have such strict guidelines that you cannot say anything that deviates from what the data shows. Like, if you do, it could cost your company like hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars. So we had to be very, very careful what we said. We couldn't manipulate anything, you know what I mean? If one doctor used something off label, we had to make sure that we were very open and honest about that, and that it wasn't recommended in the profile of the drug. So I think from that, coming into dog training and starting to see how research is interpreted and how it's spoken about, and when people say evidence-based this and evidence-based that, I found it quite shocking thinking, if I ever misinterpreted research like I see it is done here, like, I'd be out of a job. Like, you just would not be able to do that. So that's why one of my biggest pet peeves is I'm a science-based trainer, I'm an evidence-based trainer, because the amount of data and the amount of experimental research you need to have to make that claim is just not there. So I think those two industries really gave me a slightly different angle on how I look at dog training, and the lack of professionalism that we see in dog training and everything. So when I got into it, because I'm a little bit older, I got into training when I was in my early 40s, and I'm in my early 50s now, so not quite 10 years. I'd also had the experience of most of my life just being a dog lover and a dog owner. Like, I wasn't a trainer out of the womb, and I'm not really one of those people that's just a natural dog trainer or dog man or whatever you want to call it. I really had to learn it, probably because I second guessed myself a lot, and I was so late when I got into the game, and I was very aware that everybody was better than me and everybody had more knowledge than me. So I really wanted to jump in and learn. And I found there's a great accreditation in Australia, which is a balanced accreditation, and it's the only government and nationally recognised dog training accreditation in the country. So I'm really glad that I did that one because that gave me more of an insight. And I've also just had some incredible mentors from kind of different points of view, and have really had the opportunity to watch some like incredible trainers just do incredible work. And I think those combinations of things have just given me a little bit of an interesting insight that I really had to immerse myself and learn about it, because I knew it didn't really come naturally. I was the cliche kid that would sit outside with the dog when you went to family friends' houses, and I love dogs, but I didn't really understand them, you know what I mean? So when I was an owner, I made all of the mistakes,
So what
I
happened?
see.
Where was that big shift? Like, was it a specific dog, or was it really just understanding more about just what you can do with dogs as far as training? Like what?
Get into training.
Yeah. Like how did you just? I mean, that's a big change of
Mm.
from what you were doing at the moment at the
Yeah.
time. You know, like did you get a dog that you just, because that's typically what happens, or how did you enter in this?
It was something that I kind of always would see when because I did a bit of obedience training with my border collie, and we did a couple of trials, and I remember always looking at the trainers thinking, wow, how cool that that's your job. It never occurred to me that I could do it. So I always just thought, oh, I could never do that. Like I'd never be able to do that. And yeah, my husband and I, not long after we got together, we got a German Shepherd puppy, and we thought we were doing all the right things, off to the dog park, and we would literally drive around looking for clusters of people standing around their dogs, because we thought that's what
Right,
socialization
that's
was.
right.
And he was a beautifully balanced, beautifully bred showline German Shepherd that just had the loveliest nature. And we created a dog aggressive dog. Like that was completely environmental. It was 100% us. It was all the steps that you see. So when he became dog aggressive, I was the owner that was opening the front door, and he was scanning, and I was scared, like every time we would approach a corner, you know what I mean? So I really understand what that feels like. And we started working with some trainers. And again, I was lucky that I worked with 2 or 3 different trainers who came from quite different perspectives, but I learned a lot. I started to see, wow, there's kind of different ways of looking at this, and there's different approaches and everything. But I was still working with him when I started my accreditation. I was the annoying student that kept saying, well, my dog does this. Like, so would you do that in this situation? Which I know annoys everybody. But he was the first dog that I really successfully rehabilitated, and with a balanced approach, quite a traditional balanced approach. But he was kind of the benchmark for me that I think I really rehabbed him when he was about 6 or 7, like when he
Oh
could
wow.
be off leash and have dogs approach him, and he was fine. And it was all down to relationship. Like the last few years of his life, we just had the most incredible relationship. He was always my husband's dog, like he was his person, but I did all the training and everything, and we still had this incredible relationship. But no matter which dog I work with, or which approach I learn, or what article I read, I often, as everybody does, I often think back to him, and I think, could I have done that differently? And to this day, the only thing I think I could have done a little differently would have been play. I didn't know about play that well then. Like he would chase a stick or a ball, but it wasn't the game.
Just
You know what
the
I mean? Like,
importance
he
of
liked
it.
the ball. Yeah, he liked the ball. But apart from that, we had a great relationship. He was he was emotionally far better after that process. So I always look back to him as the benchmark. And then I think once I got into training, you get those outlier dogs where you throw everything out the window and it just changes everything. And you realize, oh, this isn't going to work with this dog. Like I've got to find something else. So it's all of those dogs and the people that I've gotten a lot of advice from, and just going through the process. But I think, yeah, I think I have a lot of empathy for owners, because I do understand what it feels like. I understand what it feels like to be embarrassed. to not have control of your dog. I know there was a rumor around my area that I was the person with the German Shepherd that was attacking
Of course,
dogs.
right.
You know what I mean? It was devastating. So I know what that feels like. First time I ever took a dog when I was about 18 to its first obedience class, and they said, bring treats. I bought chocolate. That's how stupid, that's how stupid I was. Like, literally. And I couldn't figure out after 15 minutes why my dog didn't want to train anymore.
That's so funny.
Um, I
I've done
know.
this myself, and you know how
Oh, really?
yeah, but I I was living in Belgium at the time, and my dog just got into a big box of chocolate candies, and I don't know, I ate like maybe 10, 15 of them, and I was hearing something that's happening in the other room, so I ran in. And then with my way of thinking, I'm like, oh, what if I use this as a reward? So I actually did try it too, but it was a bad
And you don't
idea.
get many
No, it was
reps.
a bad idea.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
so
Oh,
funny.
I'm glad, because I almost wasn't going to mention that, because I thought people will scream at the screen, you idiot, like you don't know what you're doing. But
Tell me
yeah,
a little more. I'm probably not the only one that will be interested in the like the school that you went. Was that like a online, in person? How long? Like that? This
so
is always of interest to me.
yeah, the name is the National Dog Trainers Federation of Australia, and it's a year-long accreditation, and it's mainly online, but you have two quite large block periods that for me, there was no practical in Perth, so I had to fly to Melbourne for 10 days, and you did two blocks. So everything that you've learned, you go over there and you practice, and it's the classroom setting, and you got hands-on dogs, and I absolutely loved it. Like, to be able to
Very
go away
cool.
for 10 days and it was just dogs, like, it was fantastic. And I'd say I mean, obviously very grounded in positive reinforcement. Like, we were learning Grisha Stewart's bat, and everything to do with aggression was pretty much positive reinforcement, because it's like an entry course. But you also get that balanced approach. I believe most of the course is actually based on Steve Lindsay's books, because it was created, I think maybe 10, 15, oh no, it'll be longer now, maybe 20 years ago. But yeah, I really enjoyed it. I think it's the only balanced accreditation in the country. Most of the other ones are all force free. And the funny thing is, I did consider those before I got started, and I look back and I think, wow, I wonder how my path would have been
Right,
different.
right.
You know what I mean? If I'd done one of the other ones, because I can get quite passionate with my opinions, and I wonder, like, would I have been like one of the force-free extremists? But then I think to my German Shepherd Zolly, and I probably wouldn't have been, because I know it wouldn't have worked for him. But yeah, interestingly enough, like, one of my favorite instructors when I did my accreditation, I think I started in 2015. I'm now on the board for an organization called Professional Dog Trainers Australia, which was started about 3 years ago now by a trainer named Steve Courtney, just to bring some representation into Australia that kind of covers all trainers, because we don't have that here. So we're involved in, like, you know, the tool bans, and sitting in government meetings, like going over the tool ban processes. We were involved in the IGP situation. I think it was in South Australia, where they wanted to change the criteria to IGP dogs are considered attack dogs, and luckily
Yeah,
that got
yeah.
overturned. So that got
Didn't
taken out.
they even ban it for a little bit altogether in
I
one of
think
the
in
states?
Victoria, yeah, in Victoria, I'm not sure if it's specifically banned, but the regulations and restrictions are such that you just can't do it. I'm not sure if that's 100. Victoria's probably the most extreme state in terms of those kinds of regulations, but it would have been a similar thing in South Australia, because you wouldn't have been able to import dogs, because they're now deemed attack dogs, trained attack dogs. So it would have killed the sport in South Australia, but luckily that's been overturned, and they've taken that out of the legislation. So that was fantastic to see that. But yeah, we're still fighting tool bans here. I think Tasmania here has just announced that they're looking to redo their legislation, and they want to ban e-collars in Tasmania. So we're involved in that. But as you know, it's a tough battle, but
Yes,
we're chipping
it is.
away. But yeah, but what I was going to say was my favorite instructor from the NDTF is actually on the board of PDTA with me now. So it's kind of like a full circle that I'm like, wow, like I used to look up to her so much. She was so clever. And does she remember me being that annoying student in
That's
class?
very cool, but that's very important too. I mean, for people that have the knowledge to be in this kind of committees and boards and you know, like there is a need for people that that understand what the fight is about, and hopefully, I mean, Australia is in a pretty interesting place, and you also have the different states, and just because something passes in one, it doesn't mean that necessarily
Yeah.
goes through the next one, right?
Yeah,
That's kind of
that's
how
true.
it is in the States, but we have this fear that if the door gets cracked open anywhere, it will it's just gonna be it. And actually, I feel very comfortable now. I don't know exactly why, but I don't think this is happening in the States. I really don't think so.
There's no bans in any of the states, is there?
They have been tried quite, I mean, almost every year somewhere somebody will try to do something, and there will be some either a big petition or some legislation kind of secretly trying to get passed, but eventually all, you know, dog trainers and just pet owners will go to the hearings, and just it will be so overwhelming that it gets shut down every time. and and yeah, I really think that it's almost, I'm not saying we need to not be aware and pay attention and continue to defend, but if we do what we are doing right now, I don't think this is ever happening in the States, hopefully. I feel bad for places in Europe, how they, you know, the early 2000s was just very different landscape, and even with internet, and the Europeans just didn't think that this is anything serious. I don't know. There was many factors why it happened, and it's very difficult for them right now to reverse. But they're trying, though. Who knows?
Yeah, I think it also comes down to, I mean, I get told all the time online, oh, just ignore them, just
Right.
show your training. Like we all hear that, but the problem is their voices are loud. And if you don't say something, they're the only voices being heard. And I don't think people realize how far this could go. Like people think, oh, you know, it's not the end of the world if there's some tools banned. I'm like, that's not where it's going to go. I could be wrong, but I think in Portugal at the moment, they're actually trying to ban all aversives, like aversive training. I've seen a document, but it's in Portuguese, so I can't read it. But I think there's an emphasis on e-collars and choke chains and stuff, but I think there's a general theme of they want to ban all aversive techniques, and that's where it's going. I mean, there's rumblings now about police and military dogs with all the emotive language about that, and sports and everything. And I think people don't realize that organizations like PETA do have an influence. I was reading the other day about Peter saying it's a myth that we want to take your dogs, that we're going to come and take your dogs. But the interesting thing is, in that same page down the bottom, they state they want to neuter all dogs, and they want to get to the point where there are no more dogs being born because they don't want any animal in servitude. Like that's where this is going. And I think we're like, oh no, that's sensational. It's not. That's where this is going. We've got a political party here, the Animal Justice Party, and they're very, very much PETA. Like they're kind of going that way as well, and they've got influence, you know. So I think people need to understand that you can't just train your dog and show your work, because nobody wants to go onto your page and look at your work if they disagree with you anyway. So
Yeah, and what is interesting is also that it's just so hard to talk to each other, you know, when we have opposing views. It's just impossible. Like I've honestly given up on this for a moment or a year or two. I was really thinking, well, if we talk to each other more and if we end up exploring and learning about how things can be done, we can collectively come to the, you know, grow together and get, you know, to just be better overall as a community. And yeah, you know, I kind of lost hope on this. I don't know. What is your take on this?
Yeah, I think I mean, and whenever I talk about force-free trainers, I always want to be really, really clear that I'm not talking about force-free training, and I'm not
Yeah,
talking
that's the
about all
thing. There is
force-free.
just the levels of there is
Absolutely.
exactly. Yeah, that's very true. Go on.
Yeah. And 'cause I have some force-free trainers who I consider almost friends. Like, we chat online all the time, we share ideas, and it really comes down to the person. I know with some of them there's certain points of conversations that we just don't really go into too much because we just have differences of opinion. But whenever I say, well, force-free is doing this, I'm really talking about that radical kind of
Yeah.
extremist end. And I think I don't know how large that part of the community is, but I think it's pretty large. Like, I find it difficult to connect with many trainers online that are more moderate and even interesting in interested in anything I have to say. Like, and I think like you said, you've lost a little bit of hope. And I think the reason for that is that you've got to have curiosity if you want to take a step like that and hear somebody. And I just think at that end, there's no curiosity because they believe, you know, a balance trainer, and whether you like that term or not, it just makes it easier to
Right.
say it that way, is like shutting down dogs and being violent, and they just don't believe in engaging with anybody like that. So I think that's the tricky point. I think speaking with more moderate force-free trainers may open the eyes of some of them, but I think sometimes the force-free trainers, as you've seen, the force-free trainers that do speak to balance trainers are almost vilified more than the balance trainers.
True.
You know, so
Yeah, very
it's
true.
it's
But
really,
I
really
agree.
difficult.
I mean, when I have to say something not so positive about the force-free trainers, I always have those force-free trainers that actually are forcing their ideology on us. And as you said, they're not handful of people, unfortunately. That there is I wouldn't say it's a big number, but they have a strong community, and they yeah, I feel like they're in a mission to
Oh
just
yeah.
try to shut down and do what they think is the right thing for everybody, which is kind of ridiculous to begin with. And I don't know, it's frustrating, but as I said, I have in a way given up. Like, I've learned a lot over the last few years about who they are, and one of the things that it always amazes me lately is that I start to realize that, you know, like, they really believe that if you're using any form of aversive for any reason, that means that you are not understanding what positive reinforcement can do. You don't know anything about schedule reinforcement. You don't know anything about reinforcement delivery, Primax principle, extinction burst, markers, cues, jackpots, and all these things, differential reinforcement. It's like, no, you don't know anything. Because if you do, then you wouldn't have to use aversive. And and I have so much to talk about this, but nobody wants to have that conversation. And in some way, you know, it is what it is. But they really live in a bubble where everything is just made up. It goes against any fundamental biological, like any laws of how life on Earth functions. It goes against. It's like just a fake reality in a lot of ways, you know. And on top of that, like, I mean, you know, and you know, like when we spend some time going over their studies, it's at this point they're not even cherry picking data anymore. That it's like outright designed to produce a desired outcome. It's not like and that's what makes me lose hope that any conversation can be productive. And there hasn't been, like, I mean, I know that I'm so vocal and sometimes very stubborn, but I do listen. I do change my mind when you have to present something that will be legit to change my mind. I don't believe in fairy tales and fake realities. I train dogs for 40 years, and I go out there, and if you do something really good, I want to know how you did it. But just to tell me that some experiment and study showed with 20 dogs that this is better than something else, and that was done 20 years ago, and that hasn't picked up any momentum to prove in real world that this is actually possible, I'm not interested in it.
Fair enough. And I think because when I got into dog training, I was so conscious of how little I knew. And I guess just as a person, I really dislike black and white thinking. Like, it just really annoys me. It doesn't matter what the topic is. I'm like if you see the earth is flat, like, Google a credible website. Like, it's so easy to
Right.
fact check. I mean, you've got to know what you're researching, but I kind of try to make a point of, if I'm going to tell somebody, look, like, for example, there's a training course here, which I think is probably underway now, which is force-free snake avoidance training. And it's a 12-week course. I don't know how much it costs. And if I see something like that, I seriously considered doing it. If I'd had the time. The only thing is, I would have felt like a little bit of a like a mole, like hiding and like observing. But I would genuinely like to do it. Like, if some, like you say, if somebody says, well, we're going to do this because it could be just as effective and it's whatever, I'm like, well, I want to know how to do it. Like, I talk about one of the hills that I will die on is kind of e-collar training for predation, because I just think it's so important, and I think it saves, you know, dogs' lives, animals' lives. And whenever I talk about that, I always hear, oh, predation substitute training, like,
Right.
you know, that can do it too. And a lot of people, and I see a lot of people saying, that doesn't work. And when people say you should check it out, they say, why would I bother? But I'm like, no. I get on Amazon and I buy those books and I read them and I want to see what are they doing. I actually think predation substitute training is really cool. Like, so Simone Mueller has a really good understanding of predation. She presents it really, really well. I think if you have the time and the resources and the dog and the environment that you can do that, you could probably do quite well with it. But when people say to me, oh, if a dog's killed an animal, you can do predation substitute training, Simone Mueller even says that it won't, you shouldn't have a dog off leash if it's actually killed an animal.
Correct.
Like, it's not appropriate for that. So they're even misrepresenting what she says. And I think it's still a great thing to do. And I think for a lot of people, it could probably be effective if they have that commitment to do it. But the reality is, it is never going to be as effective for those dogs that are just more serious, or the owners that just don't have those resources and environments to do. It's just never going to be as effective. And people say, well, you know, we don't know that e-collars are doing this or doing that. It's probably the most well-researched training method. And that's saying something, considering there isn't a huge amount of studies. But it's if you want to talk about evidence-based practice, I think there's very little you could point to more than e-collar training for predation. It's evidence-based, like
Right.
I argue, you know what I mean? Oh, but the welfare issues, you know, well, great. Then you do the studies and you add the welfare component into it, because that's how research works. On that note, I'm not sure if you're aware of the study, but there's a study that's like a literature review that was brought out a couple of years ago, which reviewed all the training approaches to predation, and it broke it all down, and it went through the Christensen and Dale and all those studies. It didn't include the ones that looked at coyote predation, which I found was interesting because they showed a lot of efficacy, but they were just looking at dogs. And, you know, those studies show efficacy for what they're measuring, and not a lot of them have welfare measures, but the researcher says the problem with these studies is they're not looking at welfare. So we should look at anecdotal evidence like the rattlesnake force-free aversion training and do research in that. And I'm like, hang on, that's not the process. Like, if you see an effect and you see there's always limitations, you can't measure everything, then you say, okay, we got efficacy, like that works. And we see it works in the field all the time. Like, there's so much evidence out there. So then you would do the next study and you would add welfare measures to that, and you would measure that over time. Like, there's this throwing the baby out with the bathwater. But the interesting thing about this review is it's a single author. And in the section where it says, I have no, competing financial interests or anything, the author is a force-free predation specialist who sells prey drive training courses, and has a Facebook group for her clients. And one of the rules in that Facebook group is no recommendations of aversive training or aversive training methods.
Right.
How that's not a competing, like, she doesn't have any other authors. Like, I know people would argue the same thing about your study with Dr. Nguyen, but you're not the researcher.
Correct.
Like, she's the researcher. Like, how is that not a competing interest, you know?
Correct.
So
that was very different with us. Like, I was not the researcher, and I had two of the most high-end force positive reinforcement only people that are designing the study, with Simone Mueller, it was very interesting.
Yeah, Emery Johnson's a force-free trainer, isn't she?
Oh, big time. I mean, and genuinely in a good way, not she's not just blowing up smoke. Like, she really believes in doing the best possible approach for the dogs, and she is convinced that is the force-free approach. So that there is no I don't know how much I want to even talk about that study, because it was very good study. Like, it was really, really good study. We approached a lot of people to offer either advice on what they would do as force-free trainers or be part of the study. Yeah, and like that study that Clive and Anne-Marie did, anybody can replicate it tomorrow if they wanted to. And if they have any questions, they will answer their questions the same day to help them replicate it. Now, if I try to replicate Daniel Mill's study, the famous Lincoln University, there is zero chance. It's like a swimming in muddy water looking for your iPhone that you dropped in a lake. There's zero chance. And if you, well, I have tried to talk to him several times. That's the interesting thing with most of the people that do that research. It's not that they hide, but they hide when they feel that they will be challenged. But they are very open to show up at any conference, any podcast, any speaking engagement where they know for sure that they're gonna get praised for what they do. And you know, like, I mean, being a dog trainer or being a scientist, like you have idea, you're trying to show something, and if I was to say something, I would be, you know, when somebody challenges it, I would be interested to hear. Anyway, I was talking to him a few times over the years, and to the point that we were almost gonna have a podcast. But then all communication stopped, like just abruptly stopped. And I tried a few more times, and there was just no point. And that's you know, that's on them. And that's kind of what I mean by if you don't want to really have that conversation, have that debate, have your findings challenged, prove that you're right, or accept that something you might be wrong about. It's a strange thing to say that you're doing science at this point. You know, it's like, it's an ideology, it's dogma, it's just not, I don't know. I mean, the same happened with Simon Mueller, you know, and just like you, I go everywhere. Like I pay for any online conference, webinar, being AVSAB, being APDT, being aggression conference, whatever it is. I'm genuinely curious to see what people do, and if there are any takeaways, always. So, I mean, I'm really familiar with Simon Muller's approach to predation, and just as you said, like I even asked at one point, I certainly have a lot of dogs and cases here that we can try to work online, or she can refer any of her people that finished her course that they can help with some dogs. And to me, at least, it was interesting because when we talk, then she would admit that, okay, no, if the dog is already killed an animal, or even if he didn't, but it's this hardcore wired predation instinct, then it's a different story, and then there is so and so. But ultimately, it will be just management. But I don't think that's what she says when she's promoting her work, you know, at least from what I've seen. And everybody believes that this is an alternative, at least in the force-free community. Like if we're talking about it, you know, her name will come up as a very strong alternative. But that's really not the case. And she would admit that that's not the case. The way she goes about it, at least the way she has told me, is, well, in Germany, electric collars are forbidden. They've been forbidden since many years. So we're working with what we can.
Fair enough.
Fair enough. Very true. But if you have, if you're working with a snake avoidance and you're not using aversives, it's very similar to if you're training a guide dog and you will not teach the dog that cars can be dangerous and you should avoid them, but you just teach them to cross or not to cross when you tell them to. So that's like the, I mean, in differential reinforcement programming, this is a big issue depending what we're dealing with, right? If there is definitely times when it just feels right that I know that that's a bad idea, instead of, oh, I really want to do that and I would rather do that, without ever really knowing that if I don't, and for some reason I end up doing that thing that I shouldn't, I wouldn't have a clue that that's a bad idea. Not at all. And when you do that only for the name of force-free ideology, because it's not like when we're talking how much aversives and what is the fallout and what is the whole Sidman coercion and its fallout. I'm going all over the place, but it really he's probably the biggest name to blame for all this. And I highly doubt that even the hardcore advocates have ever read and studied his work. Because if you do, you would have a lot of questions. Like, you will really have a lot of questions. It's, I don't know. You totally can teach a dog to do something else when they see a snake, but the dog will never know that snake can hurt and can really do a bad thing, which is the most natural way that you would learn about the snake, what you actually need to know about the snake.
And I think it's dishonest the way these courses are marketed, because they're marketed as force-free snake avoidance training. And I'm like, but by definition, you cannot teach avoidance with positive reinforcement. You're actually teaching the snake to detect and to use that as a cue to return to the owner, which is what a process is. And like Dr. Elif said in your podcast, I really like Dr. Elif. He's so cool. He's so interested in what dog trainers are doing, which is so rare. And I think that's so fantastic. But like he said, sure, it could work, but it could also increase the likelihood of a dog approaching a snake in the right moment if the handler doesn't notice the indication, or maybe because I mean, at the end, when Dr. Elif talked about the Kiwi studies and how the aversion to stimuli doesn't necessarily generalize to the real bird, force-free trainers aren't using real snakes. They're using scent and they're using dummy snakes. They're not using real snakes.
Right.
So that's the one thing. And I think they present it like e-collars can do this, and it's, why would you want to hurt your pet? And there's a kinder way. But I'm like, you've got to be honest and at least say, like, this takes more work. You will need to dedicate a lot of time to this. I know somebody, I think they were a client, it was quite a few years ago, who did a force-free snake avoidance course here, because obviously we have a lot of it here. And they said there were about 10 people in the class. It was a 6-week course. Every single one of the students or owners failed in the last, like the test at the end of the 6-week course.
Oof.
And the trainer said, you should have done more homework. So
Yeah,
it's like that's the
yeah.
problem.
This is like becoming this. What you just said is becoming a very hot topic, at least among trainers that I am around. That blame and shaming, that when the system is failing, that you either didn't understand it or you didn't do it correctly or didn't do it enough, but it's on you. It can never be the system that you put in question. And with
exactly.
and going even further with the snake avoidance, I mean, if the dog sees the snake, the owner doesn't see the snake, the dog is expecting now reinforcement. Now the reinforcement is posed. Now the dog is kind of tapping into some extinction burst. And it's like, hey, dude, there is a snake here.
Yeah.
I need my treat. And now the dog actually is forced to mess with the snake to point it out to the owner so it can get paid for it. It's flawed. Just the idea to think of it's just such a derailing. Then that I don't know why we are doing this, just because we are so much against the use of aversive. And again, like, I mean, I would love to talk with some of the force-free, like the extremist force-free people, the ones that try to force on everybody, about Zidman and I mean the whole thing, like, it's a flawed conflation of coercion and aversive control. It's just like they're not the same thing, you know. He equates coercion exclusively with punishment negative reinforcement, and we know that positive reinforcement can also have coercive properties. Like, and he knows that. He knows that. I mean, any kind of deprivation, you know, I don't know. It is crazy. Plus, I mean, the who was it? Perone, Michael Perone. He had a really good one. The one where he was talking about, you know,
Negative side, positive reinforcement.
Right, and how you know, positive reinforcement, you know, has often embedded aversive elements, frustration, when rewarded is called. I mean, frustration goes long ways. And I mean, that's just one of it. And on top of that, control is control, positive or negative. You cannot, it's such a, it's just ideology driven. It's not scientific. It's a very wishful, it's good thinking, but you know, the so-called fallout of the punishment, at best, it's never, you know, intrinsic. It's contingent on poor application, maybe.
Absolutely.
If anything, we need to get better at it. But the idea to abandon it altogether, it just makes zero sense.
Been this big step that we seem to have just stepped over, which was, now let's test it properly and do some proper applied research. And they're like, well, no, if owners are yelling at their dogs and scruffing them and that's causing stress, then nobody should be able to use aversives. And I'm like, do we do owner surveys to see how well they do medical interventions? And if you didn't see good results, would that mean we can't do medical interventions anymore because owners are doing it wrong and they're not even qualified to do it? It's so illogical that's how that's what we're taking from research.
Yeah.
Like there's the couple of, I think it's the Hibby and the Rooney studies that show up in every position statement. They're literally
Right.
one of 3 references on Wikipedia when they talk about the history of dog training. and they say positive reinforcement training is more effective. And I'm like, it's just bizarre to me that people are using those studies. And if you look at them, we have no idea about the variables of the dog. Owners are doing random angry things. And if you look at the limitations, the authors say themselves, it could also be that owners lack an understanding of training methods and learning theory and timing. The authors say it themselves. And I think if you're a trainer, you're like, yeah, that's actually what it is. That's not the issue. Isn't that positive reinforcement is more effective than aversives. It's just, you need to know what you're doing. I mean, a lot of the force-free trainers say, oh, anybody can punish a dog. Like, that's easy. But no, it's not. Like, if the
Right.
research shows us anything, it shows us, because I don't think there's no such thing as really bad research in a way, because research does tell you something. Even all the owner surveys and the Lincoln study tells you something. And that is, if it's not done properly, it can cause issues. You've got to know what you're doing. You've got to have competence. And I think that's that's the key. Like certifications, education, regulation. I support regulation, but yeah,
And
it's just,
like when you said it's not easy, and at the same time, what is easy about punishment is that when it's done properly, besides being effective, we, like any living being on our planet, responds exactly the way it should respond.
exactly.
That there is no fallout at that point, right? Like like Sidman's ideas of the exclusion of aversive control. I mean, ignores just reality. Like it's the most critical way we learn through natural consequences of aversive experiences. Like how can you exclude it? And you know what, because I've put at one time a lot of time in his work, and Eduardo Fernandez's work kind of mirrors his work in a lot of ways. They really, like in a lot of ways he just copies it and presents it as a work. I'll explain and see if I make sense to this, but going back to Sidman's ideas, it's like, okay, well, let's say coercion is, it has the fallouts, and let's say that coercion and aversive control are one and the same, which they are not. Like this is just ridiculously thing to even talk this way, but let's say they are. Like if I think and I say, well, so what can we do? What are our options then? And everything starts to lead towards errorless learning. And then I've listened to at least 4 very long presentations that Sidman did on errorless learning way back, like when it was a hot topic, when Skinner was just thinking that that's just gonna take over the world, which would have been great. But this is now, what, 50, 60, 70 years ago? And it hasn't happened. So the alternative answer that I proposed, it's not there. Like, it's really not there. We know errorless learning has extreme limitations. We know trial and error has I don't know. I get so frustrated with this.
Me too.
Because,
I think sorry, go ahead.
no, like it really, that's when you start to kind of peel that onion, that's where it goes. Like, okay, so what do we do? And eventually we're going to say, well, it's errorless learning. Where in our planet errorless learning really flourishes? Like we're talking slightly more complicated tasks. And errorless learning is in deep trouble. Like, we're not talking anything complicated. Just you throw a little curveball into the errorless learning, and we have a problem, a big problem.
Exactly. And I know in Dr. Fernandez's study, which I've only gone over once, so I haven't gone over in extreme detail. And I know you have to control variables, so it's not that I'm criticizing this, but I think they excluded some dogs from that study because their food drive wasn't high enough. And you've got to have an equal playing field just to show the results. So I'm not saying, oh my God, they shouldn't have excluded them, because I understand why, but that's the reality. Like, as trainers working with dogs day to day, like that's what it all comes down to. There's so much nuance. There's no way you can look at these things in black and white. And that's where, like, negative reinforcement, even like CAT, like I think CAT's one of the coolest training systems ever either. The problem as well, the problem with it is it's difficult to control the environment to do it. That's the problem. And the owners have really got to know what they're doing. But I think it's all negative reinforcement. Well, it's mostly negative reinforcement, and the dog has choice and all these things. But it still gets poo-pooed by, like, our veterinary society here in Australia because it's negative reinforcement, and you shouldn't use negative reinforcement in training. Like, that's such a black and white statement that doesn't take into account so many factors. What are you going to do with a dog that just doesn't want to take food? For some owners, they don't have 3 months to build food drive and put in all that work. Like, they have a dangerous situation and they need to do something now. Like that, I sent you that study the other day, which because I'm preparing for the workshop on the weekend, so I've been deep diving into a lot of research. That DOAN 2023, which is actually a very thorough review, because it goes into the humane hierarchy and cat, bat, all of these things. But it's a literature review on force-free training practices for aggression and fear and anxiety. And I'm literally reading from it. It says there's a surprising lack of research into the effectiveness of behavior modification programs in canine aggression and fear and anxiety. The scientific evidence for efficacy of behavior modification interventions for aggression and fear anxiety without medication in canines is almost non-existent. Like, that's where we are. And it goes through it all. And one of the biggest factors I've seen in this, and I've seen in a lot of other studies that do look at, like, classical conditioning procedures and stuff, is one of the biggest barriers to success is compliance. And that's another thing that I really got out of the pharmaceutical industry, is when I would speak to doctors aren't always choosing a medicine just based on the highest efficacy and the lowest side effect profile. Sometimes they're not choosing a medicine because the regime is too complicated and the patient won't do it. And that's the truth. And it says that in this literature review, and it says it in a lot of other studies. Owner compliance was low. Once the trainer handed the dog back over to the owner, they didn't continue with it. You see it in cooperative care at vets, like they'll do all the training. And of course, you should do all that R+ and teach handling and desensitize that and everything. But as soon as they're in the vet room, they don't do it. And so then all of a sudden the dog's in a situation that they've never dealt with before, because they haven't learned to deal with pressure and cope with stress. You know what I mean? So it's lovely to have this ideology in the perfect world, but our clients aren't professional dog trainers. They're people that I've got single mums with small children and 2 jobs, and even getting them to do 2 5-minute training sessions a day can be difficult. And it's not because they're lazy. It's because they have challenges in their lives and they only have certain resources that they can allocate. And that doesn't mean, oh, we should throw e-collars on all of them.
Correct.
But it does mean we need to look at things which are going to help the dog's quality of life long term as much as possible. And that comes down to competence of the trainer. You know what I mean? To be able to meet that goal without too much aversion, but also, give the owner hope that they can get somewhere with their dog. Like this review, it points it out black and white. It's not effective. And I think there needs to be inclusions of other things. That's what there's a lot of trainers doing some amazing work. I've got one of my mentors and very good friends, Brett Bailey, Who's a Good Boy Industries, his business name is. He works in New York City with some really, really serious dogs. And his approach is almost force-free most of the time. He's a balanced trainer, so he's using negative reinforcement and stuff. He's very good at what he does, and it can be done to a certain degree, but he's still not a completely force-free trainer, because it is not under the illusion that it's going to be effective for everybody. And
yes, and that's really the big, like, if we really just have to break it down to the most simplistic argument, is that the positive reinforcement people want everybody to believe that one size fits all. And then there is the other crowd that says that's absolutely not true. And there is time and place when something will be more effective than something else. Like that, and I don't see why would you even want to argue, and how can you argue that? Like, how could you argue that?
They argue, well, effectiveness isn't everything. And that's what Susan Friedman said in the humane hierarchy. And that's what Dr. Fernandez says in his life model. He says it can't just be about effectiveness. And I agree, it has to be about quality of life and understanding welfare. But at the same time, it does have to be effective. Like, otherwise, what are we doing?
Right.
Like, it does have to be effective. You can't go, well, we're not so worried about it being effective, so we will just settle for it not being effective at all in a lot of cases. And I'm not saying it can't be effective. Like, a lot of my reactivity programs are pretty much force-free, because the client can do it, because the dog's capable, all those factors. But it's not everybody, that's the thing. I think everybody thinks that we're just throwing a prong collar and e-collar on every single dog we see. And some trainers need to do that because they're getting all the most difficult dogs that have been failed by everybody else. So it's not that I even judge that, but there's just I get involved in the arguments and the comments. It's one of my toxic traits that I just can't not. Sometimes I can't stop because I get so mad. But doing that, I've got such an insight into how the arguments go. Like, I could create a flow chart. Like, I know I'm going to say this, and then they're going to say this, and then they're going to say this. Like, it always goes one of a few ways.
Right.
And whenever you really get down to it and you're like, okay, cool, tag me in a video of somebody
just
doing it.
not that different how politics in any government is the same thing. But I tell you something,
say, well, show me.
with
And they'll say, well, I don't need to show you. You can find your own evidence.
right.
And I'm like, if I'm going to argue something and I make a point, I'm going to give you the evidence to back it up. But then they're like, Google is free, like, because they know it's ideology. And I get into those arguments because I hope at some level I might plant a seed, or somebody else might see it in the comments and go, oh, is there evidence? And they actually go looking for it in these cases where we know there's no evidence, apart from maybe the odd dog that does really well, in extreme cases, for sure. But you can't provide a treatment that is only effective for like 10% of your target population. Like, that's ridiculous. And that's when dogs fall through the cracks. And that's what we're seeing. There's a vet behaviorist in my city, and a client sent me the letter and the report. There's a vet behaviorist in my city that when you go to see them before your first session, you have to sign a contract that states, I agree that in some cases when a dog has bitten a person, the only way to keep people safe is behavioral euthanasia. And they haven't even seen the vet behaviorist yet. And they said that was very off-putting. Luckily, their dog wasn't human aggressive, but because that's the expectation sometimes. They put on the reports, no aversives used or aversives used, like that's a huge factor in the aggression case.
Right.
Yeah,
very strange. Yeah. And I mean, before we go to this, I just want to go back. I'll tell you, and everybody, kind of interesting situation that I was with Eduardo Fernandez, like after he came up with live, which I have to even think now what exactly stands for, least inhibited And what was that listing here with that?
Oh, I should know because I've been reading it so many times. Functionally effective.
Functionally effective, yeah.
I like the functional part of it, to be honest. I think that's
no, again, it's very much, that's why I say, like, I can see how the ideas of Murray Sidman, it's the same thing. It's like a version, and it's fell out. It's like, well, we can do life instead of Lima, and so on. The question remains the same. What's the alternative? And of course, just like Sidman, he comes up with the errorless learning comparison to trial and error. And as you said, like anybody that spends a little time, that knows what to read, like it's like, first off, out of I don't know how many dogs, only third makes it through the actual training stage. Just think about that. Imagine you have 100 people in a study and only 33 manage to finish. We have a serious problem. Like, this should, like, as far as I'm concerned, this cannot even go into publication. It just, there is nothing there. Something, and I don't know what, but something went very wrong. It's a insanely, so it's a big red flag. Then there is the, what is really puzzling to me is the, what happens with the trial and error dogs for incorrect responses? Like, what are the feedbacks? Are we just kind of like, what are there any consequences? Are we kind of vaguely say some word? Like, what actually is really what he considers trial and error in a study that is so important that we are comparing, that it actually can change the direction of where the whole training industry goes? Like, what do you do in this for incorrect responses, right? When, like, how does the dog know that they were wrong? And are there any consequences? Like it really just left in the open. It doesn't make sense. Then the training session, it's a mess. Like, there is I don't know, how was it? It was just really kind of mismatching. Like, there was a claim there was like 2-hour session, but then they were like 1 minute to 12 minutes. And you kind of, like, you cannot put it together how long the sessions, or is it one like in some increment, like how long that was it? That's But then there is even a bigger problem, like with the groups of, from the way I was reading it, it sounded like definitely the errorless group had some extra training to go through the what do you call it?
Yeah, I know what you mean, but I haven't read it enough times to remember exactly what it's stated.
But anyway, like it's just not. It cannot be. It just cannot be enough of a something that the dog trainer should consider to change and say, okay. Again, you have the in one study you have the huge dropout rate, the questionable or zero feedback when the trial and error dogs make the wrong decision, the confusing setup with the how long the sessions are, the maybe the different training groups, are there any consequences in a trial and error? Because otherwise, what kind of trial and error that is, right? Are we doing some shitty version of errorless learning and we're calling it trial and error? and we're comparing it to the perfect trial and error version, I don't know. But he also don't want to talk. Like
No.
I've tried to talk to him. Like I've tried for like 2 years. I am busy, I'm working on something. I'm like, okay, I'll call, check with me in a month or 2 months, 3 months, 4 months. And I kind of mark it on my calendar and I check with him. Eventually there was a point where he's like, okay, I want to do it. I mean, I told him, like, you clear it for whatever reason you don't want to, and that's fine. He's like, no, I want to, but I need to do it with a moderator in a panel, and there has to be a woman in it, and we have to do it live. I'm not joking.
What does he think you're going to do?
I'm like, okay, I'm totally fine with that, but I don't think I can come up with all that shit. So can you make it happen? And I think he did it just because to create this impossible, it's like, okay.
Well, I reached out to him and he set an appointment within a week. But
right, as long as I say, as long as they know that they will not be challenged, they're extremely happy to talk and receive praise.
I mean, I definitely challenged him. And again, I don't want to personally attack Dr. Fernandez. He's obviously a very well-respected scientist, and I like some of the components in his life model. A lot of it I don't. But it's, researchers are people. And I think unless you're a dog trainer, like Dr. Plonsky and Roger Abrantes and people like that, I think that you have to accept that you might not understand the methods that you're judging. When I spoke to Dr. Fernandez, I didn't tell him I was a balanced trainer. I said I was a trainer. Like I don't really feel like I need to put a neon light above what kind of trainer I am. I just said I'd like to talk about your life model, and that was true. And we had a nice discussion. What was interesting, though, was we talked about the functional part of the life model, which I like. And it says that you need to really understand the function of the behavior, so that if you train an alternative behavior, you're meeting the same function if possible. So I asked him, I said, when it comes to like predation or something like that,
Right.
the function of the behavior is to attack an animal because it feels good. So if we just do differential reinforcement, we're not really addressing the function of the behavior. And I said, plus there's so much evidence that e-collar training can be so effective in predation, for example. I said, surely from a welfare scientist perspective, wouldn't the next step be to look at welfare more so that we can make sure that it's been done safely? What was interesting was when I said that, Dr. Fernandez said, which studies are you talking about? He hadn't heard of about 5 of the studies that I was talking about. And I did send them to him afterwards, and he picked them apart and just said they weren't any good. I'm like, they're probably better than any study that, that we've really done in anything else in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
And I respect that he has his opinion. I think it's personally, I think it's quite biased, but it's just disappointing to see that lack of critical thought that, oh, well, maybe look at this and yes, that's good, but we really need to make sure the trainers know what they're doing. And what was almost a little uncomfortable was he started to talk about the balance trainers that came for him in a way that I thought, oh, even though I'm talking about e-collars and stuff, he's obviously hasn't clicked that I'm a balance trainer. So I didn't really bring it up, and it was almost a little awkward. But I appreciated his time, but that just goes to show, like, he's presenting the evidence of what's effective and what's not effective, and he wasn't even aware of Dale and Totoro and Christensen and those studies. Like, because I said, why aren't we seeing those studies in position statements in the reference list that you recommend? And he said, which studies are you talking about? So it's almost like there's research that's now almost being whitewashed, like it just doesn't exist because it doesn't fit the narrative. And the researchers and the dog trainers aren't even aware of it because it just suits the agenda.
Right. Yeah, again, I mean, it's a tough one. Like I have difficult times with this, you know, because when you when somebody has influence and it's advocating for something that they know or they may not know that it's misleading, I think this is a problem, and it should be exposed, or it should be at least, yeah, I mean, exposed or talked or whatever. Like the whole life thing, like just something as simple as that, it really fails to acknowledge situations when punishment is absolutely the only available option. Like, this is not arguable. And no matter how you want to talk about it, if you cannot agree to that, I mean, there's just canon. I mean, there's just so much literature, and there is so much empirical. Like I've been training dogs for a long time, and what a study can tell me, if I cannot find use of that in when I'm training dogs, actually training dogs, what value is that to me? And why do we need to praise a study like that? It really, like, he overemphasizes the whole, you know, minimally inhibitive approaches and techniques and whatever, and at the same time really neglecting situations where more assertive interventions are just like really needed. There is an emergency that you need to do something like this. Like I know from, and many trainers, like if they get familiarized with this, they'll be like, this is going to lead to disastrous outcomes in certain situations with certain dogs, without a doubt. Like, without a doubt. And what do? Then we say, well, we tried everything. And that's where it gets very shitty. We tried everything. And then they will go, that's what I was showing. Then we will go to the psychotropic stuff, right?
Yeah,
I mean, I have bottles and bottles and bottles of this shit from I don't know from how many years. I will tell you something really, at my, like with my students at my, well, not my students, but like I have like my graduates from my school, like we have monthly calls. And recently I just thought of something, and I made like as we had a Zoom call, like a survey. And there were probably, let's say 50 to 60 people on the call that are actively training dogs professionally, pet dogs. And I asked them how many of them have had clients in the last 2 years that the dog was on psychotropic meds. Every single one had a client. Every single one. Now, that's disturbing. Next question that I had for them was, what was the youngest age that the dog came with psychotropic meds? 6 months old. For being active, for being a puppy that likes to play. Then my next question was, any of the dogs that came through the training, was their intention or a process to get wind of the medication eventually? No. That's disturbing. And then when you think about it, it's not even, at this point, it's so generic, unfortunately, that it's not an animal behaviorist. Any vet, the dog's gonna come to the vet clinic and is gonna say, no, I don't want the vet techs to jump on me. And the veterinarian's gonna prescribe, in some cases, Prozac for not even having the knowledge, not having even a consultation, but have the ability to write a prescription. And that's kind of, this is what happens when, you know, the force-free and errorless learning and all the differential reinforcement starts to fail. The next step is psychotropic meds. And it's so overdone. And you're coming from a specific background that I didn't know. So I want to hear what you think of all this that's going on everywhere in the world.
I'm seeing that as well. I can easily think of 3 dogs in the last 6 months. I think one was a border collie, one was a Rottweiler, and one was a cattle dog. You know, dogs that can be a bit energetic and stuff. And all of them were young, like 5 months or so at obedience training. And they said, oh, you know, she just couldn't concentrate. And she was like, oh, it's just so excited and wouldn't listen. And the trainer said, oh, well, sometimes medication can help them focus more in obedience class. And I'm like, no, your dog just shouldn't be in that obedience class. They need to be fulfilled somewhere else. And luckily, all 3 of those owners, it just didn't sit well with them. And I'm like, I'm not surprised. And every single one of those dogs, they didn't even have really behavior problems. Like they just pulled on the leash a little. You know what I mean? It wasn't a behavior problem. It's like, oh, your dog can't focus, medicated. And, you know, when I worked in pharmaceuticals, we, as reps, we profile doctors so that you kind of know what area or what kind of perspective they come from. Like some are very patient focused, some are very clinically focused. Some just want to show the reps that they know more than them. Like, and so we would profile them. So every time we go and visit them, we know, okay, he's clinical focus. He's really going to want to hear about this study. Whereas other dogs are like, well, I need to relate that to my patient. But doctors vary. Like some write scripts quick, others don't. But you know, their side effect profiles are real, and how medication is considered least inhibiting or least intrusive is beyond me. I mean, I haven't taken SSRIs, but I know if you take SSRIs, they say like you might feel nauseous, you might feel like this. We can't explain that to a dog. Like, how do we know how they're perceiving, how they're feeling? And when there's not even any research really showing efficacy for what they're prescribing it for. I mean, that Dinwoody,
that's a big problem.
Came out.
That's really a big problem. There is not one study on it.
No, the Dinwoody study that came out a couple of years ago, it was a survey, showed that medication did not help in one instance of the types of aggression they were looking at. Not one. And I think that's part of the problem, because they're getting too prescription happy because the training isn't working as well as it could. So we've got to find another solution, and it becomes a vicious circle. And I've got this in my workshop. It's with the welfare situation as well. You look at all the welfare models. One of the biggest criteria across most of the models, the 5 freedoms, the 5 domains, all those models, is freedom to express natural behavior. In the latest model, which I just read, which is actually quite interesting, they keep emphasizing that a dog needs to be able to interact with its environment in order to learn to adapt to stresses and seek positive alternatives. Like, that's a key indicator of welfare. But so many dogs cannot do that because they can't be trained to be in the environment. And so if you say, well, they need this for welfare, you know, there are balanced training solutions that can be minimally added to a positive reinforcement training program that could allow a dog to spend more time with its owner, be in the environment, have a better long-term quality of life. Oh, no, we can't use those because they cause welfare issues. It's like a
Right.
vicious
Right.
circle. You know what I mean? It's and the problem is curiosity. They've decided this is what it is, and there's no curiosity, and that's not science. Like, take a look, be curious, come and have a look, but they don't want to. I had a person trolling my page yesterday, who said, "E-collars damage relationships. You should use love and kindness. Positive reinforcement
Oh,
allows
those
dogs to
cliche
live
things,
their
yes.
life." You know what I mean? And I was very polite, and she got back and I said to her, "Please feel free to have a look at the dogs on my page and tell me which ones have been trained with aversives and without," or something like that, and tell me they don't look happy. And her response was, "I will absolutely not look at your page." And I'm like, "Well, what are you doing commenting if you don't even know what I'm doing? Like, have a look.
Right.
Show me the dogs that are
Right.
shut down." They refuse to even learn both sides of their argument. And I said to her, "You lose this argument by default because you have no interest in understanding."
And even that don't help.
Yeah.
You know, I
Yeah.
listened later. I don't know. It was recently something. Again, as I say, I really, really am very curious, and I listen all the time, regardless if I like or don't like the people, because sometimes
Mm.
they're takeaways. And so anyway, it was just recently, and then it was the Daniel Mills talking about punishment, and just said something like, I'm paraphrasing probably grossly here, but something like, if you are punishing your dog, how do you expect them then to trust you? And so this is a person that has spent their life. He has every possible credential he can have. He's teaching. I mean, he's like in the cream, in the top 1%. And when you give such a statement, I can tell you, you absolutely don't understand what you're talking about. Like, you have no idea what you're talking about. You don't know what punishment is. Just like whatever, like I have him here because I know that was, like,
Yeah.
it's exactly the same thing. He's the same thing. It and Skinner and Sidman and everybody, for whatever reason, they cannot make a difference between this universal suppression of any behavior and what functional punishment, contingent punishment, really means. They're not the same thing. And every single time they're talking about punishment, we're talking about this universal suppression. Of course it's going to have fallouts. Of course I would never want to walk into that room when just bad shit's happening that doesn't make no sense. But why are we talking like this? Like, just because the ideology calls for it, or because we don't understand it, or... I mean, really imagine if that was the case. If you punish, you're losing the trust of your dog or your kid or your whatever. Like, how can you say this? It sounds like interesting thought, but the moment you put a little more deeper thinking into it, you have to realize that that's just something went wrong. And that's not what we are talking about. That's not what punishment really means. Nobody talks about that. No, I mean, I cannot say that dog trainers don't do that, because there's shitty dog trainers that do that all the time.
Of course. And that's always the argument as well. But
Right.
Too many people are doing it wrong. And I'm like, well,
right.
A lot of people are drinking and driving, but we don't ban cars, We don't just focus on them. Like they need education, they need licenses.
Right.
And the other thing is there's this idea, which I think is a little bit of anthropomorphism. There's this idea that a physical punisher must be so much worse than anything else.
Oh, yeah.
When I was a kid, there was still, I'm old enough that there was still corporal punishment at my high school when I was a kid. And my brother, who was a couple of years older than me, he was a bit of a troublemaker. He didn't go to school a lot of the time and got into trouble. And sometimes he would get, I think they had the stick or the ruler on the back of the hand, and he would get that. Sometimes he would get detention. He hated detention, but he didn't care if he got the ruler because it was quick. He didn't really care, and it was over and done with. Like, and I'm not saying that that's how it works in dog training, but it's like it's how the animal perceives it. And there's a lot of situations where, like my Malinois, who I didn't mention, comes from Ben Gertz of Canine, who had you out in 2019. It's where my Mal comes from.
Nice.
But for her, if I give her 2 pieces of kibble because her sit was a bit slow, she looks like she's gonna like bite me in the face. Like if I stop a game, which I don't do, she would be so angry. You know what I mean? And I don't use many corrections with her because she's quite sensitive, but I know when she's in drive and stuff, a little correction is really just communication to her. But if it's restriction, she's mad. When I did my BH in April, it was the only time I did the full routine and she didn't get the ball at some stage, and she loves her ball. And I was really looking forward to the end when you sit down and the judge is giving you your communication and you love on your dog, because, I see everybody do that. I'm like, oh, it's going to be such a great photo. That's going to be such a great memory. We got to the end of the routine. She's such an affectionate dog. So I was so surprised. We got to the end of the routine and I was trying to give her affection, and she looked at me like, you mother, because she hadn't had her ball. And she's like, did you forget something? Like, you could see it. And I was like, she was mad. She was literally mad at me.
Right.
She wouldn't even let me pat her, I took her out and we had a game after we left the field. That to her is the worst thing in the world. Like, people need to stop us making these assumptions and these comparisons to human children and all those kinds of things. I think Dr. Melanie is talking about that quite a lot at the moment, how the brain perceives pain. Like, it doesn't have to be physical, and restriction, which can happen a lot. Like, a lot of my clients, their dogs would have been so heavily restricted without some kind of aversive management or some kind of punishment or negative reinforcement, that they would have a much lower quality of life. And so would their owner, from the guilt that they would feel. That is the reality. But unless people start being curious, I think it's getting a little better, but at the same time, I think it's getting a little worse. It's definitely gone up a notch in the last few years. But
like,
I do think it's
universally or in Australia?
Universally. I mean, we see it here, the extremism here as well. We're in an interesting situation with the States where prong collars or e-collars aren't banned. You can't walk into shops and buy tools like that. Like, you cannot get them over the counter. You can only buy them online. And it's usually quite difficult to get them. Like, you still get some of the cheap Amazon collars. So if I'm out and about and I see a dog on a prong collar or an e-collar, that dog has almost certainly been trained by a professional trainer. Whereas I know in the States, it's probably not so much like that, because I think the access is so much easier. So in a way, Australia is doing it right. It's difficult to get these tools, and you can generally only get them through trainers, but they still want to ban them. There's no abuse cases on file here with prong collars or e-collars. It's just propaganda.
Yeah, I don't think this makes difference, honestly. Like, my experience over the years, like especially with electric collars, because that's always a kind of ongoing conversation of, well, they shouldn't be, like, you cannot go just to the pet store and buy one. And I've gone back and forth with this a lot, but lately I'm, like, when I think throughout all the time when a client comes to me And people don't know, but I do have a pet training business. Like I do it because I like it, and I take cases. I can afford to take cases that are interesting to me. But I've done pet dog training for like really since the 90s, early 90s, you know, like a legit pet training business. And very rarely, like most of the times, somebody's gonna come and they have a problem, whatever the problem is, and they have went to the pet store and they have bought a electric collar, but they are shitless scared to try it on their own. And even when they're with a professional trainer, they're still extremely careful and reluctant. I'm talking the majority of the people that come. Of course, there is some dumb ass that will do dumb shit. Nothing, we cannot do nothing about them. Like, we just have to accept that we cannot do nothing about them. Unfortunately, you know, with social media, they can be seen and something can happen. And right. But as a rule of thumb, the pet owner that goes and buys a electric collar from a pet store, they're not just putting it on and starting to play like with a remote control car. They love their dogs, and they really are doing it because, but when, you know, so anyway, that's kind of my experience with, and as I said, I go back and forth with that.
And I mean, I cringe more when I see a client hasn't worked with a trainer on my assessment form, and I say, "What tool do you walk your dog on?" And they say slip lead. I cringe more about that than if I see prong collar, because I know that's way more dangerous. But slip leads come in pretty colors, so that's okay. You know, they're the most dangerous tool there is. They're probably my favorite tool because I think they can be used so subtly. I rarely use prong collars and e-collars, not because I don't want to, I just don't have the kind of cases that often need that. And generally we're just using a slip leash. Sometimes we're using a harness, you know.
Right.
It's just, and I always say to people with clients, like, if they're like, "Oh gosh, you know, they look so awful," I'm like, if you saw a prong collar for the first time and didn't cringe, what's wrong with you? But that's the problem. Nobody takes a step further than that and investigates them. You know, I advocate for tools and e-collars and prong collars, and people say to me, "Well, you're lazy if that's all you use." I haven't done a single e-collar program this year. I keep my skills up, but I will die on the hill of, like, there are some dogs, and people think, "Oh, you've been so sensationalist. I'll die on the hill that they do save lives and they can improve welfare. And I think that just cannot compute to some people. But I'm like, come and see. And you will see that, you know, dogs aren't shut down and having to wear collars for their entire life. Why? Because of clear contingencies and clarity and training. That's why. Just like everything else.
This is a next study I'm kind of planning to do with some different people, that it's really strictly focused on ethics, welfare, and it's not a comparison. Like the whole idea of comparison force-free to any form of aversive, there's just no point of that. It's not the point. If force-free works, great. If it doesn't work, is there another option? Probably yes. Are you willing to try? Well, that's up to you. But as I was saying earlier, I mean, control is control, positive or negative, you know, it's control behavior. And what is really just mind-boggling is that we present aversive dog training equipment as humane and not aversive. Like, we're just flat out lying to each other. And I don't think we're lying to each other. I think everybody understands that they are aversive tools. But we have to have that facade that they are not.
And that doesn't help either.
No, it doesn't. That's just as shitty as the electric color trainers that tell you that, oh, we're just tickling the dog and he doesn't feel nothing, and it's pretty much the same kind of like why cannot be honest conversation? I mean, what is a gentle about the gentle leader? It's an aversive control.
Yeah. Oh,
It's
no.
it's
It's management.
right, which is also another problem, because which one is better, to actually train the dog not to pull or manage it for the rest of its life? Like,
And if you need a
what
head
is the pros
collar
and
for
cons? What is the
management,
cost and benefit?
exactly. And I use head collars sometimes. I use most tools, like here and there. Head collars, if I've got a sensitive dog or I'm worried about the dog being stressed, head collars are usually the last tool I would reach for. But I think every tool, I have so many people say, oh, you shouldn't use those tools. You should just use a head collar. And I'm like, how do they function? Like, what is the function of how they work? And they're
Right.
like, oh, they just manage the dog better. And I'm like, what is the function? It's negative reinforcement, and some dogs really struggle to accept them. And that's a highly aversive situation.
Yes.
And they're like, oh, well, I can't believe you're not using head collars, but you'll use prong collars. And I'm like, oh, I use them. I'm just honest about how they work. Like, I don't need to say something as management. You know what I mean? I can say, yeah, I'm going to use this because I want to incorporate positive punishment into this training program to stop that behavior. And if they say, well, that, and for people that say, oh, e-collars don't hurt, they tickle, well,
Right.
physical punishment is meant to be aversive. That's kind of the point.
Right.
It's how it affects an animal long term that's the question. I mean, that's one thing in the life, I don't know if it's in the life model or if it's in a welfare paper that I read, talking about good welfare is measured from during and after the training process. But I'm like, but sometimes training is stressful, even if it's positive reinforcement. It's long-term quality of life. That's what we need to measure. We need more longer term studies that aren't Shilda 2004,
Yeah.
which is what.
Unless you take cost and benefit under consideration, you're unfair in your judgment. You're very unfair.
Yeah, I put that to Dr. Eduardo because I said to him, it's a little bit like, cars are contributing to the climate crisis. Well, we should ban cars. But I'm like, well, maybe we should find other alternatives and research and see if we really can find a better alternative before we ban that thing because we don't like something about it. And I think that's exactly what's happening in dog training. And I put that to him. At the moment, we know e-collars can be effective, and we can see that in the field every day. Do all the
Right.
research, find the alternative methods, and find that they're effective and have higher welfare if that's what you want to do. But isn't there an argument that we shouldn't get rid of one thing until we find an effective alternative? And just wasn't interested in hearing it because of the welfare concerns.
Right.
The welfare
But
concerns
their
of not
claim is
being
that
contact.
they have found the alternative and it works
Yeah.
and it's superior, and this is the problem that we are faced
And then
with.
you list the Lincoln study as proof.
Right.
Like, come
Right.
on, we'll put the
Right.
caveat.
Like going back to even the Lincoln study, like he, again, like, because I've been trying for so long to talk to Dr. Mills. There was and he has said this few times in different occasions, that he doesn't argue about electric fences. He argues about electric collars. And the argument is that, well, because of the human error.
Right.
And, it's a shitty argument. And even if that's your argument, then at least be very open about it. Don't try to make a phony study that proves nothing. I mean, I'm sorry that I'm so direct about it, but it is a really just nonsense that nobody knows what happened unless you really try to dig in and try to find some pictures and like snippets of videos to actually understand what was going on. The whole force-free community swears by it. And they truly believe that this is the answer, they have the answer. But then when it comes to demonstrate it, it's not there. And it's the same with dog training, with competitions. Are there any great force-free trainers that do protection sports? Yes. Are they winning consistently? No.
And I think the argument there will always be, oh, well, you don't need to use aversives for sport. It doesn't matter if you don't win so much. But if you're not progressing and successful and your dog's not doing well, then you probably won't do it as much. And then you've got a dog that isn't being involved in that sport that they love so much. Like, just because you use a minimal aversive amount in sport doesn't mean that the dog's terrified to walk on the sport field. That's what they want to argue with. I really like the analogy that you give of the hot hands. Like, it's part of a game. It's, if it's clear and you understand it, it's not going to cause long-term issues, and you can both get on with enjoying the game with the rules. Like, that's
most
the reality.
games are, the most interesting games are, there is an aversive element to it. Most interesting games. And then there is the extreme. There's this thrill-seeking kind of, there's people and dogs and animals that are genetically wired to seek it because there is a very different satisfaction. Just like, you know, we watched a few days ago UFC fights. I mean, some people want to be punched in the face. This is just what they enjoy.
Yeah.
And it's not for everybody. And go and treat that person without aversives. He will find a way to get what they need. And typically, he will end up in in some street fight and go to jail and so on. And you know, instead of having a much healthier outlet that satisfies that genetic predisposition. And that this is, again, the problem with the positive reinforcement ideology, that one size fits all. It's like, no. Again, some people like to be punched in the face. Some people like to do ice skating. And some people just want to watch TV and eat potato chips all day long. And there is nothing you can do to change neither one of those. And yeah, I'm pretty convinced, and I have I'm working on a new presentation about this that should be very interesting. But the competitions are one of the most cool things that we have as a dog training industry for so many reasons. Even how does anybody can say that trainer is better than that trainer? What is it? Well, he's been paying taxes on his business for 30 years, so he must be a good trainer because he didn't go out of business. Is that a criteria? Or he was working much harder cases than that other trainer. Well, how can we compare which case is harder?
That's true.
Or there is nothing of nothing like competition gives you this format. It's like, no, we have a certain thing that we all gonna do under the same conditions, and we can see who's doing it better, who is more effective in the training, what is the emotional state of the dog, and so on and so on and so on. and so that's kind of what I'm saying with having a study. And man, I almost want to start talking about surveys, because that's another can of worms that's just so horrible. I mean, that whole AVSB thing, their missions position training statement, and on the bottom of the page, they just giving the 4 studies, and then 4 more studies that are citing these 4 studies, and then few surveys. And this is basically, this is overriding all the behavior and all animal learning and psychology theory that we have for 100 years.
I know, I'm with you. I get so, every day I get so frustrated. I'm not at the point where I'm at burnout yet, where I can't handle it anymore. I'll still get into the comments and argue about it. Because I know once you ask them certain questions, they can't answer you. Like, it always hits a wall. One of my mentors said years ago, the force-free extremists are so angry because they know they don't have as much control, and they get really angry. And I'm like, sometimes I think that's what it is. They just, and I also think that it comes down to people and personalities. Of some people just want an enemy to make themselves better about themselves.
Well,
and
and
I think
social
that's,
media is a perfect opportunity for all this fighting too.
Yep.
But there is no, like for me, really, like, I'm so in peace with, like, I have no reason to try to convince somebody that has no idea how to train dogs, even I don't know, like most people that are talking very loud on social media, and most people that are involved in the studies and the research, they're no dog trainers, or they're very, very poor dog trainers. They have zero skills to do anything of value. Likes, followers, I really don't care. I'm old enough that I just don't give a shit about likes and followers. I need to see something that you can really do with a dog, not take a clip out of 200 tries and give me 10 seconds of something insanely cool. I mean, very good, but that's not what dog training is about. And as I said, there is ways that we can compare high-level dog training. We know what high-level dog training means. And there is not one person that comes to mind from the force-free extremist people that it's even remotely close to being a good trainer, that has proven to be a good trainer.
That's part of it. They find a way to be relevant in their community by fighting against the evil balanced trainers. I think there's a strong negative correlation with how extreme you are and how little dog training you show.
Yeah.
Like if your training is so good, why are you talking about mine all the time? Like, talk about yours. What do you do? Like,
like the moment you show that you're better, everybody looks up to you. People can tell. Yeah, it's but this is really, again, where I am, and I kind of learned this from, I started to mimic some other trainers in trainers that I know. I'm like, yeah, that there is absolutely no reason for me to waste my time to try to argue or convince or just do anything with somebody that is very happy on a keyboard that cannot train dogs. And there are many of them.
Oh, yeah.
And And when I realized that they cannot, like, the one of the reasons that I was, in the last few years trying to talk to them was because I really believe that we can come together, we can have some unity, and we can, accept who we are, accept that we all have ultimately the same interests to have happy, healthy dogs that are not abused. But that's not the case. And the moment, I know in the States, they cannot do much. As loud as they are, there is a very big opposition to them, that they just cannot prevail. They absolutely cannot prevail. I'm certain of that. So what's the point of wasting time? And having said that, just like you said, I have plenty of people that train force free, and I really love it because I like how they think. I like how they try to problem solve. I like even their frustration where they're like, damn, I wish I would so like correct him right now, but I'm not going to, because that's my path. And, you appreciate that. You appreciate it. Right.
I respect it.
Of course.
I respect it. If you've got a dog and the only way you can give it freedom is you drive further and you have a long line and it's 15 meters or whatever, and your dog's getting fulfilled, and you just don't ethically want to use an e-collar, I have no problem with that. If your dog's needs are being met and they're getting to live a good life with you, that's unfortunately, I find that's quite rare. I think a lot of force-free training techniques are great. I want to learn them all, and I want to be as good at them as any force-free trainer because I think they're so valuable and they're the foundation of everything that I do. But that's not everything, and I think that's what people really need to understand. And when I argue with these people in the comments and stuff, I know I'm not going to convince them, but I want other people to see, like, if they say something and they go, oh yeah, they might be right, they can see that I've said, well, no, that's not actually the way it is.
No, I encourage you to keep going. I think it's
my toxic trait.
It's a good thing to do. No, seriously, I encourage you to keep going with it. Going back to, I just thought for a second about the errorless learning, and as much as I speak against it, when you have the errorless learning as a principle in your head, when you're creating a training plan, then your trial and error learning becomes extremely effective just because the errors are minimized because of the way you're thinking about creating the plan and setting the criteria of the training plan. So I'm, as much as I'm talking against it, I'm not against.
Sure.
In this pure form of, no, I hate this not good idea. I just, there are limitations, but there are benefits. And the benefits, again, is if you start to think of any dog training as far as how could I create errorless or close to errorless learning in your training plan, and how you raise the criteria or come down, then whenever there is an error, it will be very effective, the whole learning process, right? So, yeah, I sometimes people think I'm so against it, and it's just like if I walk into a room and they blindfold me, and I have a choice to play hot and cold or only hot, I'm playing hot and cold. And if you choose to play hot, good for you. But I'm not. Like, there's no reason for it. Regardless of how far the game goes, I'm playing I need to know. And that's trial and error in very simple form. It's interesting. So let's change the subject a little bit. What are you doing with your dog? Like, what are you training with the Mali?
We did our BH in April. So funny thing is, I almost a few weeks before, because she's had a couple of foot injuries and I've been busy and I've been kind of in and out of training. But when Ben Gertz said at the beginning of the year, you had to put on the board what if you were going to do your BH or whatever, and I was like, oh shit, now I really have to commit
That's
to it.
good.
So
That's
I really
No,
appreciated that.
having goals, that's good.
Exactly. And that little push was helpful. And I thought, and this was in February, and I thought there's no way I'm ever going to get there. And within two weeks out, I almost pulled out of it because I thought I'm not going to be able to do it. And we got best BH on the day. And it just goes to show, like, you don't know, how you're going to go. But she's had another couple of foot injuries, so she's got this term off, but we'll start in the new year. And I put myself down for IGP obedience one.
Nice.
She's not ready for protection, and nobody likes doing tracking, but I do need to get into that. But Ben keeps saying you'll learn to love tracking, so I'm waiting for that to kick in. But
I don't want to even say it's discouraging. Like I mean, at least from what I remember, tracking it's pretty hard, the conditions in where you guys are,
Yeah, we get all the ants and
right.
And
it's very
I
similar
wanted
to
mention,
Florida.
I didn't know if you knew that Ben got national champion at the nationals like this year with his dog Stan.
Oh wow. No,
Yeah.
I'm not good at keeping track of everything. Like one thing lately that got my attention, and it was on your Facebook page, I think, or Instagram. And it was about the wild dogs and the dingoes.
Oh, right, yeah.
Tell me a little bit more about this, because I'm like, one of my obsessions is stray dogs and wild dogs, and like this stuff is very interesting to me, and I can't remember exactly the post. I was like, oh, I need to go back to this because there was some link, but then somehow, of course, social media takes your mind
I'll find it and
away.
I'll send it to you. I'm not an expert on the topic, but from what I mean, that post was there. I think there's I'm not sure if it's Western Australia, but you know how vast Australia is. There's such big areas. There's a station somewhere, and I think they actually do accommodation, and they had a couple of dingoes that come and go that they know quite well by name. But the area that they're in, dingoes are legally allowed to be hunted, because I think they're considered that, I don't know the legislation or the laws in Australia, and I could be wrong. So if I'm wrong, somebody correct me, but that they designate dingoes as feral dogs, and that means that they can be killed. And these two dingoes that were come and go from the station were killed by hunters, and the station people, I think they found them because they didn't see them for a few days, and they were just devastated. So there's this big push to redefine dingoes, which I think they used to be.
They did some DNA, some testing, right?
Yeah. There's actually some new research going on in Sydney. I looked it up the other day, and I think it's just a research grant that's just been approved, and they're only just starting the research, and they're really deep diving into, I'm not good with genetics, the genomes or whatever it all is, because they are a unique species. I think they're meant to be the only domesticated dog that when came into Australia became wild again. And I think that's what makes them unique. But the argument is they don't damage the environment or the ecosystem, because what they do kill and what they do isn't fundamentally like damaging livestock populations or anything like that. Like they keep a balance, and that's what they're not recognized as at the moment. So I think there's a lot of research going into that, because I don't know all the details about it. I think they were defined as one thing, and now they've been redefined, and now they're trying to define them back with proper research. But they're really interesting.
How often do you see them? Do you, like, if you go out and about, do you get to see them or not
No,
really?
not unless I'm near Perth, which is, you know, the biggest city in Western Australia.
Right.
So you're
No.
not going to see wild dingoes around here. I've had a couple of clients that have had dingoes, which were really interesting to train. They were actually more biddable than I expected them to be, but they had a decent prey drive on them though. But yeah, no, you'd have to go out. And, I've never seen a dingo, and I probably never would unless I went to the right areas. I think you have to be pretty
I
far
tell you
out.
the funny story. Because I think at the time, you know, when I was there, and somehow, I don't know if I really talked about it, but it became apparent that I wanted to see them. So we ended up at the zoo or some animal park.
Oh, cool. Yeah,
But I
yeah.
was happy even with that, you know,
Yeah,
because
they're pretty cool. They're
like
pretty
to
cool.
me it was more important to see dingoes than any of the kangaroos or koalas or
Oh
anything
yeah,
like that. That was like, no, I gotta see the dingoes.
yeah.
Um,
When one of my mentors was out from Canada doing a seminar here, all he wanted to see was working kelpies. So we
oh
went out to
yeah,
like a
oh, I
kelpie
didn't think
farm.
of that, but that's
That was so
amazing
cool.
animal.
What was really interesting to me when we did that was I knew we were going, and they bred kelpies as well, and I knew we were going to see like proper working kelpies, and we were going to see them work and
Oh, you're
everything.
gonna make me want to go back to Australia.
It's so cool. You should come back. But what was really cool was I kind of got there expecting to see all these really energetic working dogs and everything, and they had like about 5 or 6 kelpies just on chains in the shade and stuff. They were so chill, and they were so social and so polite, and it really, which I know anyway, but it really just hit me like, God, these dogs are so fulfilled. You know what I mean? That
Right.
they can chill and they're not frustrated. But as soon as the handler or the farmer came to get
Yes.
them, we're just on,
Yes.
running across the sheep, and it was just so cool. So cool to see a dog working like it's supposed to work,
Yeah,
you
you
know?
talking about it just reminds me of all of my experience with sled dogs.
Oh
They
yeah.
act
Yeah.
exactly the same way. They would be just look like the laziest dog, just staying in the sun, not even curled, just like spread out and getting all the sun, and whatever is happening, they don't care. They're just laying down, 50 of them. And the moment they start to bring any dog equipment to set up a
Mm.
sled, it becomes a madness
Mm.
everywhere. And
Mm.
and there is this insane joy when they do what they are selected and bred to do. It's like so amazing. And what you're talking, it just reminds me of exactly the same interest in different
Mm.
dogs that are bred for different purposes. But
Yeah.
kelpies, I mean, they can do any livestock. I mean, they are very hardy dogs, right?
They are. When you train when I train ones in the home, it's a real shame, but I think the genetics and stuff, you see a lot of weak genetics, like in the kind of more companion dog kelpies, a lot of really fearful kelpies. And
Interesting. Yeah.
out of the healers and the border collies and the kelpies, I'd say I see more fearful kelpies than any of those other breeds. Healers are usually pretty robust because not a lot of people get healers, and they're pretty tough dogs. Border collies are kind of hit and miss. Nothing worse than a human aggressive healer, because they will redirect on you so
Quick.
fast. Never see it coming. You never see it coming. I love them, and I've worked with some incredible healers, and there's something really special about them. A lot of people call them redneck Malinois, and I think that's so
Right.
fitting.
Yeah, yeah,
The
yeah.
healer. But yeah, when I see one that's human aggressive, I'm like, oh man, I'm gonna get tagged if I'm not careful. Yeah, but it's a real, and that's why it was so surprising to see those kelpies that day, because I'd never seen kelpies that balanced before, which is such a shame, you know. But I'm kind of squeamish. I don't like seeing animals suffer or animals be killed or anything like that. But I
Of
must
course.
admit, I really love watching like the English terrier videos when they lift the haystacks and all the terriers go in and get the rats, or they're overturning the dirt, because they just love it, and they're so quick and they're so efficient. You know, if I had a terrier, I'd totally go ratting with it. I think it'd be cool. It'd be so much.
This is so
I'm not
funny.
going to pick pick up the rats. Somebody has to pick up the rats afterwards, though.
This is so funny. We just did this. Like, I have one of my trainers here. She has two, and of course we have dog food, we have kennel, and so there was a bunch of rats kind of starting to hang around. And this morning we let the little guy out, and he just caught 4.
Oh, wow.
Like just you know, when they know what they're doing. I mean, you know, there was a moment where we had to. He went under a deck that kind of like a real labyrinth under there, like he was gonna get lost, so we had to try to dig him out, and he doesn't want to come out. But that's the drives and the genetic makeup, you know. They know exactly what they're doing, and
yeah, they're little killers. I've had clients with some really cool little Australian terriers and beautifully bred dogs, and the client wasn't really up to speed on what they had on their hands, and he was just a little puppy, but he was one of those dogs where the client was like, "Oh my God, this dog's so full on," and I'm just like, "This dog is awesome!" Like, he's got everything you want, all the drive, all the confidence, you know, everything. And she was like, "Oh, I just, you know, want to be able to walk him, and I'll do what he needs with all that kind of stuff." She lived right across from a wildlife area with
beautiful.
no fences, and where all these like little baby ducks and stuff. And I'm like,
Oh, God.
"You need to really be on top of this
Right,
dog's training.
right.
Like, he might be little, he's a little killer. Like, you're going to have to be on top of this dog." And I think she really got it by the end of the program. But God, he was a cool dog. He's one of those dogs I would have just totally taken home, but to anybody else, he was just a terror because he just wanted to go, go, go all the time. But beautiful little dog. I totally had
You know, that
little.
reminds me of something like about another ongoing conversation when a pet owner has a dog and the dog has a problem, and then somebody that has the same breed, and it's like, "Oh no, my dog is good, and it's good because it's my training approach, and it's because I raised it right," and that happens so often when it's like, "Well, you don't need this kind of training, you don't need this kind of tool, my dog doesn't need it." It's like, it's great that your dog doesn't need it, but dogs are so different. They can even litter mates are, you know, one can be way more twitchy than another one. One can be way more pronounced, you know, predation instincts, and the other one can just walk around squirrels all day long and not care. And you have to take under consideration their individual makeup, you know.
And when people say that, it's like, "I don't know why you use those tools. I've never had to use them." And I'm like, "Do you like walk into cancer wards and say, 'Why are you here? I've never had cancer'?" Like,
right,
it's
right,
not
yeah, very
about
much the
you.
same.
It's not about you. I've done this, I've had this, I've had dogs for 30 years. But it's not everything's about you. Like, there are different people with different needs and different dogs. It's just, yeah, ignorance. I don't want to go back down that rabbit hole.
Right, do you have, what
I'm
are
gonna
the
have to go in a
bands?
minute because I've got to get ready for this workshop that I've got to go
Yes,
to.
yeah, I'm gonna kind of check that one out too. Tell me about, just really quickly, are there any bans as far as dog breeds in Australia?
Yeah, we've got the American Pit Bull Terrier is banned and has been banned since the 80s, I think.
And what does that mean? You cannot breed, or you cannot own, or like
I mean, I
nothing?
think when the ban came in, you just couldn't breed or bring any into the country. I think you'd be pretty hard pressed to find an American Pit Bull Terrier
Wow.
here. But I've trained some dogs that I'm pretty sure there's some in them, but you can't breed them and you can't import them. So they're just trying to breed them out. I think Queensland has just banned or wants to ban. I'd have to look it up, but the Presa Canario, I think, is banned here. The Dogo, was it Dogo Argentino, I
Okay,
think, is banned.
the the typical cases. Do you have
But
the ex-bullies, how the UK has the problem with that, or no?
not yet, not yet, but we don't tend to see, I mean, the UK has got some issues, like, you know, to be fair, we're not seeing it here. I'm seeing a lot of clients that I do have, I've had 2 or 3 in the last 6 months that have got XL bullies. They said people are starting to be mean to them and crossing the road and not wanting them to come into the park, and which is so sad, you know. But
Right.
yeah, no, we don't have we're having a bit of a spike in dog attacks, loose dog attacks and stuff. And it's always convenient that they only mention the breed if it's a bully breed. Otherwise, they don't mention the breed at all, which is really frustrating. So Queensland is pushing to ban breeds. What's really interesting about that is PDTA was in a discussion, like a Zoom discussion with the Queensland government, and we were in the discussion with the AVA, which is the Australian Veterinary Association, and the RSPCA. And do you know what? We all agreed. We all gave the opinion that it's not about the breeds. It's about education. It's about breeding practices. It's about proper containment and training. And we all agreed. And
That's awesome.
I don't think I was in that one. I think our president was in it. And afterwards it was like, wow, like we just had a conversation, we all agreed. But you know what the government did? They're going to ban the breeds because they don't want to hear that because that's too much work.
Yeah.
Education and breeding legislation and stuff. It's so much easier to be viewed as these dogs are dangerous, let's ban them all. And we know that doesn't work. It doesn't work because that's not the main problem.
And a lot of times politicians do that just to look good.
Of course.
For
what the people,
you know,
what the people want. They want to get voted in again.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Jacqui, that was cool conversation.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
What was the topic you're gonna cover on that conference? It was very cool, catchy title that you had.
It's I can't even remember what the title. I keep saying the misconceptions, but that's not the actual title. It's myths and navigating truths in the dog training industry.
Yeah.
But we're gonna go through research and stuff. I actually wanted to ask you if you'd mind if I use one of your e-collar games, because I want to kind of go through that and kind of
absolutely.
Yeah. Because I heard you talk about them. I thought that might make it fun, because otherwise it might be a bit dry. But we're gonna cover everything.
It's called Beyond Myths, Navigating Truths in Dog Training. Yeah, very cool one.
Flying out to Melbourne tomorrow, so we'll see how that goes.
Oh, it's gonna be fun. I mean, it's so is it gonna be streamed or is it just in person?
No, it's an in-person one, but I just don't know how it's going to go, because I've never done anything like this before, and I want to make sure it's fun. But if it goes well, I might do something live, or I might break it down into like smaller sections, and maybe present.
So if I give you an advice, at least for yourself, you should make a video for yourself, at least that it's of decent quality, you know.
I've got my DSLR I could take. I just don't know how much memory stick I've got, because it's an 8-hour seminar.
It's worth making those recordings. It's not hard nowadays, so I don't know.
Send me a cinematographer, that'd be great.
Yeah. Well, thank you for doing this one, and hopefully we stay in touch and we keep because it's interesting. Like on a side, when we talk about all this, you know. It's very you know, it kind of energizes me, and it's always interesting conversations that we have.
The opportunity to rant, because I have to hold it in.
Yeah. Jacqui, thank you, and enjoy the rest of the day.
Thank you. I'll chat soon.
Yes.
Thanks, Ivan. Bye.
Take care.